Hey guys, what's up? This is Benjamin Moriniere, and I just want to say, thank you for tuning in. God bless you wherever you are in the world. Stay safe wherever you are. Today we are talking about a very serious subject, and though if you guys know me by now, I'm kind of energetic on my videos. I tell a few jokes every once in a while, but this is a very serious subject that we're talking about, and I hope you tune in. It's going to come from my background and my standpoint, being a Christian, being an African American, growing up in the South in America, also having world traveled, and now living in Japan. So a lot of different perspectives coming in there, but I hope that you will pay attention and really get something out of this conversation. All right, guys, so let's get right into this. My point today is that when laws are made that combat the hate in our environments, that combat the hate in our countries, wherever we are, when we make laws that combat the hate, we will start to see fear subside and we'll start to see people love each other more. Okay, so let me say that again. When we have laws that combat hate, we'll see the fear start to subside and we begin to love each other even more. So let's first talk about love. So if you ask the average person, or anybody for that matter, what they think the opposite of love is, most people say what? They say hate, right? People say that the opposite of love is hate, but in actuality, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is actually fear. All right. So the opposite of love is fear. And let me get into this. I'm going to put a few things on the screen so you guys can read them. Remember, I'm coming from a Christian perspective. So whatever background you have, just pay attention and you can make of it what you want. Okay. So coming from my perspective and coming from the biblical perspective, the opposite of love is fear. It is in fact not hate, but it is fear. And let's talk about it. We're going to look at 1 John chapter 4. In 1 John chapter 4, it says in verse 18 and following, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out all fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears, or somebody that's scared of punishment, is not made perfect in love. So if you fear a person, then your love is not perfect, right? So there's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. And now listen to this. That was verse 18. Now verse 19. We love because he first loved us. Talking about God. We love God because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, but yet he hates his brother, he's a liar. He's a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they can see, whom they can touch, and cannot love God, whom they have not seen, or if whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have not seen, cannot love God, because you've never seen God, you've never hugged God, you never gave God a high five, So very, very simple language and a very profound meaning at the same time. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. Okay. Now that we understand that the opposite of love is actually fear and it's not hate, then what is the opposite of hate? If we always thought that the opposite of love was hating somebody, and it's not, so is hate just out there by itself? If you don't hate somebody, what's the opposite of hate? So I'm going to save you a lot of time and a lot of thinking about it, and I'm going to tell you right here. So the opposite of hate is the law. You're like, what in the world? What does that mean? So let me explain it to you. Let me break it down so we can all get this. We're going to talk about the dynamics between love, fear, hate, and the law. Let me break it down all the way to the beginning. Let me break it down. So when mankind first came along, God created, Adam and Eve, and he gave them laws. He only gave them two, but he gave them laws. And man always had laws per se, and we'll see that in a second, but it wasn't really written down at first. It was inside our hearts. It was inside our consciousness, not our consciousness, but our conscience, right? But eventually, as laws went along and as people, hated each other, killed each other, murdered each other, all these different types of things, eventually the laws were written down. We all seen the movie. Moses goes to the top of the mountain and he hears the voice, Moses, Moses. And he goes through that, and he gets the Ten Commandments. So that was the first time that, not the first time that man had seen laws, but it was the first time that God had penned them and said, this is what you need to follow. So we have that, the Ten Commandments. But before the law, and in places where they didn't have the Ten Commandments, God also says that you don't have an excuse, because I haven't just written these laws on these 2 tablets of stone. I've written my laws on every single man's heart that was ever born. And I'm going to show that to you in a second. So no matter if you lived next to Moses and got the law, or you lived in Central America during the time when Abraham was born, whatever it was, he said that I wrote my laws on every single person's heart. And we'll look at that here. So let's look at Romans chapter 2, starting at verse 12. And he says, all who sin apart from the law also perish apart from the law. And all who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. So indeed, when Gentiles, meaning anybody that's not of the Jewish faith, who do not have the law, do by nature those things required by the law, meaning that they never heard the law, but they know some kind of down on the inside in their conscience that it's wrong to take another man's wife, or it's wrong to murder their brother. When they do that, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have Moses' 10 Commandments. People around the world in a tribe in the heart of India 5,000 years ago knew it was wrong to kill their dad because they got mad at him. So their laws are written on their hearts. It says in verse 15, they show that the requirements of the laws are written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So we understand here that men always had laws put in their heart. What are the laws for? And I can't wait to get into this part, but I don't want to move ahead too fast. So these laws that we call the 10 Commandments, or whatever other commandments that God gave, that was the time when he gave him the 10 Commandments. When he gave Moses the 10 Commandments was when he actually, penned them for us to have. But there was always laws written on our hearts. There was always laws written everywhere on every single man's heart. Every person that's born has God's laws written on their heart. Understanding that when we come to a certain age, the difference between good and evil, between bad, between cheating people, between murdering and living a good life, or whatever else, we understand these things by those laws written on our heart and backed up by our conscience, and number 3, backed up by our cognitive reasoning, which he also gave us in free will. All right, guys, now we're really going to get into the meat and the potatoes. Or if you're from Texas, the barbecue and the chitlins. No, I'm just kidding. I don't eat chitlins. But here, look, check it out. It's important to understand here that what a law really is. So you're like, Ben, I don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? The law is the opposite of hate. That doesn't even make sense. Doesn't even make sense. Well, let me explain it to you this way. A law is actually an expression of love. Okay? So we all know that as humans, we can go overboard. We can start hurting each other, trying to take each other's stuff, all this. A law, what it really does at the root of it and how God intended it, what a pure law is that it says, hey, Ben, hey, Mike, I love you, man. Let's keep this thing going. Let's stay in harmony. But, we get a little bit crazy. So let's make a couple laws that, for us and our relatives, that, we'll do this and we'll abide by these rules, and we'll have this governing body that will enforce these rules, or our council, or whatever we have, our tribal council will enforce these rules, so that we can keep the peace between each other. Because if we don't, if every man is just doing whatever is okay in their own eyes, we're going to have complete chaos, right? And so that's the highest meaning of what a law should be, is that it's an expression of love. It's supposed to be something that keeps the peace in its purest form. Okay. Now that you kind of understand the vein that I'm going in, I'm going to try to give you some stuff that will expand your mind now and then hopefully blow your mind a little bit later. And the next part we're going to go to is really going to start showing you that true overlap. I mean, it's like the Marvel universe. It's all connected. That true overlap between love, between fear, between hate, and the opposite of hate, which is the law. Okay. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 22. And let me set the stage for you here. Jesus, who is God in the flesh, as Christians believe, is God in the flesh, is in a crowd. So by this time, he's very popular throughout the entire known world. And now you have a group of leaders who you would call political factions, who were priests, but they were political factions. One of them's in control of what you call the temple, and one of them controls the smaller, what you would call like little synagogues or little churches in the other towns and in other areas. Okay, so these groups always, whenever Jesus is around, they get jealous, and whenever he does something good, they call him Satan. And they try to ask him all these questions to try to make him look bad in front of the crowd, or try to put him in his place. Because Jesus is still in his early 30s, and some of these priests are 60, 70, 80 years old, and they want to look good in front of the crowd. So here in this particular spot, the Sadducees, which was one faction, just got like completely obliterated by Jesus' answer, got made look the fool of in front of the crowd. And now the next group comes on and wants to take their pot shot at Jesus. So they come up to him, they said, so let's look at here, Matthew 22 and 34. Hearing that Jesus silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the other faction, gets up and they get together. One of them, an expert in the law, so he's like a lawyer, tested Jesus with the question, teacher. And you got to remember that Jesus is only like 30 years old, and this guy's definitely probably older than him and seemingly more astute in the community. So he's mocking him by calling this young guy teacher, like, hey, master. So he's like, hey, master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? So remember we said commandment or the law is an expression of love, right? So which is the greatest commandment in the expression of love, God's expression of love through the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. So this is the first and greatest commandment, Jesus said. And we talked about that before in 1 John 4:19. We said that we love God because he first loved us. So that's why we want to obey this first commandment. That's why it's the greatest one. Why do we want to love God with all our heart, our soul, with all our mind? Because he first loved us, right? So Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, of the law, which is an expression of love. So God is saying, my greatest commandment to you, my greatest expression of love is number one, for you to love me back with all of your heart, your mind, and your soul. Easy, right? Then he says, and the second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. We said love is the absence of fear. Don't be fearful of your neighbor. Don't hate your neighbor by following these laws. If you follow my laws, these two greatest commandments, if you love me with all your heart, and if you love them just like you love yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, then obviously you're not going to grow full of hate and bitterness and anger and envy and strife towards them. It's easy. And then Jesus says something that is super remarkable. He says, all the law, every law in the world. And the law is an expression of God's love, right? All the law, all the expressions of God's love and the prophets. In other words, people who talk about they love you and say they really love you. He said all of the law and all of the people who talk about my love and how they love people and care for people hang on these two commandments. So he's saying whatever laws you make and whatever people that are bringing you these laws, if it doesn't fit these two, it ain't the truth and it shouldn't be there. So he's saying if these laws don't demonstrate a love for me, and if they don't demonstrate a love for your neighbor, then he says these laws are not even on my radar. Like this not has nothing to do with me. And you might say, some laws are trivial. Don't spit in the sidewalk, whatever. But if you really get to the nitty gritty details of it, we can see how this goes across the board. That laws are made for the decency of humankind, so we can live together in peace and function together as a wholesome society. So that's all he's saying. Okay. So now I think I've expanded your mind a little bit to understand that a law combats hate, because a law in its purest form is an expression of love. It's a way to create boundaries and rules that will allow us to live a harmonious life, or a harmonious life together with other people. But now let's look at another part. So I think we've expanded your mind. Now let's try to blow your mind just a little bit and look how it even connects even more. So we look at chapter 5 of Matthew now, and this is Jesus speaking here. And this time, this is the Sermon on the Mount. So this is this really first big, this would be equal to like launching like the last season of whatever, like, I don't know, Seinfeld, where it had like the most views out of anybody in the world. So this is like Jesus's super Sermon on the Mount. Like this is where he's just going to blow up around the world. Like everybody's going to know him. And so he says here in the middle of his speech, he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law." So a lot of people look at the Old Testament as a law, and of course the New Testament as like the time of grace, which it is. But he says, don't think that I've come to abolish the law. And we said a law is an expression of love in its purest form. I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. He says to complete them, basically. Why? Because God is love, right? So let me go through this, and I'm going to go back and explain it. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. So Jesus says, I have not come to, just destroy the law, abolish the law, just throw out everything that's ever come before. He said, no, I haven't come to destroy it. He said, I have come to fulfill it. He said, those laws were written out of an expression of my love for all of you, that you can all get together and get along better. So I am coming to show you how this thing really is supposed to work. And he says, for I truly tell you, until heaven and earth has passed away, not the smallest letter, not the smallest stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law, from the expression of my love, until everything is accomplished. So again, for Christians, we believe Jesus is God. We believe God is love. So those are all synonymous. Jesus is God. God is love. God in the flesh. So therefore, if Jesus is God and God is love, which he said himself, why would he come to destroy the law, which is an expression of his own love? And we all know from other places that a house divided against itself won't stand, right? So he didn't come to destroy himself. Why did he come to fulfill the law then? Why would he need to? And this is where you see where it's really all connected in there. Why did he come to fulfill the law? Because mankind had proven over and over again that we cannot keep the law. We got the laws, we step on the laws, we step on people to make it to the top. We kill people, we steal, we lie, we do everything every single day, right? We have proven over and over that since very back at the beginning, Adam and Eve, this sin nature is passed on to us. And at some age, from a little kid and while we're growing up, at some age the light comes on and we truly understand the difference between, good and evil. We understand between light and dark. We understand when we're doing wrong, when we're cheating people. We call that the age of understanding, right? Um, but he says, I haven't come to do away with this. Um, Let me scroll down here. But, we get to the point where we understand that none of us can keep the law, even though God made it as an expression of his love. And so the whole reason that God had to wrap himself in flesh and come here and show us how to do it was because we just couldn't do it. We still can't do it. And we get to John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. He had to come because we couldn't do it ourselves. He made an expression of his love through the law where we could try to live with each other, live in harmony and peace. We couldn't do it, so he had to show us what real love is, by sacrificing himself and raising again, right? So now that we've gotten past that stage, that he's fulfilled, and when he said fulfilled, he's taken us into another stage. All right, so he took us from the age of mankind living under the law of God to an age where we live under grace. I understand that nobody could keep these commandments. Nobody can live up to my expression of love. But what Jesus did was he provided a sacrifice. He covered us with his blood. And he's the lawyer. He's basically the lawyer that stands in the middle of what we would call judgment from God. He stands in the middle and says, and the judge gets up and says, this person is guilty. They've disobeyed the laws. They haven't listened. They deserve punishment forever. And Jesus stands up and he says, a lawyer, he's the lawyer in the middle, the mediator that says, look, I made a sacrifice for them. I gave my life for them, so that they can stand before you, with my blood as witness, saying that they are free from the wages of what they have done, from the payment of their law breaking. I have already paid for that wage. It's something that they couldn't do on their own, so I had to do it myself. Okay, so that's what the gospel is really all about. So here we come to the end, and I've said a lot of things to try to get the backstory to what I'm going to say next. But the gist of it is understanding that that laws, when we have good laws, when we have good pure laws, that's what's going to combat the hate in our different countries, in our society, in our micro worlds, at work or wherever it is. Those laws, those pure laws, is what combats the hate. And when we have those laws, we start to see the fear subside. We don't fear each other as much because we have good laws, and we have good people that are regulating those laws and enforcing those laws, should we decide to continuously and habitually step on those laws. And when we have when that fear starts to subside in society, we can begin to love each other even the more. So I would say unto you, everybody out there, if we really want to make a change, here's what we got to do. We have to understand that the opposite of love is fear. We have to understand that the opposite of hate is pure laws. So laws that are an expression, because laws are an expression of love, right? So what we have to do is look at it and say, how do I take this environment and in the realm of loving God with all my heart, mind, body, and soul, how do I love my neighbor as myself through laws? How can I make their life better? How can I make their children's lives better, their education better, and just as mine, to give them the same opportunities, to give them the same freedoms, the same liberties, the same benefit of the doubt as anybody else. We need laws that are going to allow people to live and to prosper without fear, without living in fear. People have lived in fear in this country and other countries around the world, but have lived in literal fear every single day of their lives, because of the color of their skin, right? We have to look at our communities and really take a gander at the top reasons why we live in fear of each other and why we hate each other. And that's a lot of reasons, right? So you can look at the African Americans compared to, and looking at the white counterparts. You can look at the African Americans compared to the Latin community. You can look at the African Americans within the African American community. The top three reasons why we fear each other, the top three reasons why we hate each other, and then we can really get to the root of how do we change that? How do we change the education system? How do we change the laws that where we can live better together? How do we change the laws so that society is more fair, that there's fair opportunities across the board, that if somebody's willing to work hard, willing to go get the education that they need, that they'll be afforded the same opportunities, and be able to take those opportunities instead of working double the amount, getting double the degrees, putting in double the time for only half of what somebody else gets for a lot less work. So we got to look at a lot of different areas in our society, but it evolves around and it revolves around understanding that fear is what is gripping our society right now. The opposite of loving each other is fear. Fear is gripping our society, and they understand that that if we're going to get past the hate, that comes with lessening the fear through better laws that really apply to everybody across the board, and laws and organizations that enforce, organizations that enforce those laws that are full of stand-up people, that are full of people that really get it, all right? And people that don't get it shouldn't be a part of those organizations that are enforcing the laws that are trying to keep peace in society, whether that's the government, politicians, whether that is the police force, whether that's the military, whatever it is, but understanding that our places of protecting others has to be something that's really pure and from the heart. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this little discussion. I know it comes from a very subjective background on my part, but that's okay. I'm sure everybody has their own views on it. But I want to thank you so much for listening to me today. And I hope that my words and what I said, and really that thesis, that once we really make good laws that can combat the hate, we'll see the fear subside, and we'll see people start to love each other more. I hope that that statement there really sticks with you, and it sticks with you for the rest of your life, and kind of helps you determine what you want to do and how you want to make a difference wherever you are. So we're all looking for a reason, or looking for a way to make a difference. And I know that's hard. We don't know what to do. Sometimes we don't know what to say to our friends or on social media, but we can all make a difference, and we have to find out how each of us can do that. And believe you me, that I'm going to do my best to do my part, and that's all that we can ask of each other. Since they've been out. Peace.